Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we are going to discuss the nascent democracy of Bhutan. Bhutan has just completed its second democratic election and the party which ruled Bhutan for the last 5 years has been defeated. The opposition, which had only 2 seats in the 47-member National Assembly in 2008, has won a thumping majority this time around. A ruling party going out and making way for another is the way of democracy. But does the formal electoral process make Bhutan a complete democracy? How strong are democratic institutions and sentiments in Bhutan? How susceptible is the new democratizing but landlocked Bhutan to the outside influences? And will democracy and the political and economic opening up that goes with it influence the form and content of India-Bhutan relations? To answer these questions, we have with us a very distinguished panel. We have Ambassador Nalin Surie. He's been our High Commissioner to the UK, Ambassador to China, and you've also served in Thimphu as the number 2 between 1986 and 1989. We have Ambassador Shashank. He needs no introduction, a formidable diplomat. He's been India's Foreign Secretary. And we have Dr. Nihar Nayak. He's an Associate Fellow at IDSA, Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, and specializes in Bhutan. So welcome, gentlemen, to this conversation. Ambassador Surie, let me begin with you. Take us through the process of democratization in Bhutan. How did it begin, and why did it begin at a time when in neighboring Nepal exactly the opposite was happening? Nepal was regressing into monarchy and the monarchy trying to be executive monarchy, and in Bhutan here was a king who was actually trying to abdicate and saying that let's democratize.
I think you've answered the question yourself. The advantage that Bhutan had is in having a very wise and sagacious king, very far-sighted person. I think he realized very early, certainly by the late 1980s, early 1990s, I think he was clear in his mind that Bhutan had to modernize and yet retain its traditions and culture and control outside influences beyond a point so that it retains its identity. And he realized that the general trend all over the world was towards democracy. So he began preparing his people and his government for moving towards a transition to democracy, which I believe he has very successfully implemented. He has retained enough safeguards to ensure that democracy, some of the ills of democracy do not come to bear on Bhutan beyond a point. But I believe that as long as he has a major guiding role to play, democracy in Bhutan will proceed apace, as we've seen in the last elections, and you will have a peaceful change of power, legal change of power every 5 years.
Mr. Shashank, since the king retains a guiding role, do you think Bhutan's democracy is really a guided democracy and not democracy as the rest of the world knows it?
Well, Bhutan is a very special case. It lies between 2 very major powers of Asia, China and India. One is a totally democratic country, a bit chaotic also, and too voluble. On the other side, China is a very effective, focused country which has been developing at a very rapid pace. And most of the people in Bhutan belong to some Mongoloid races, very akin to people living in China or various parts of China. Therefore, Bhutan's king or Bhutan's monarchy, I think as my colleague says that, Nalin says that they were very sagacious monarchs. They have seen what is going on in Europe. There are constitutional monarchies. There are non-constitutional but the traditional monarchies where democracy is also given a role like UK. So he has tried to do the same thing, and he has got hold of some good constitutional experts from India, like Dr. Venugopal, who was able to prepare the constitution on the basis that Bhutan should maintain its special features, at the same time allow young people to go in for a democratic transition. So I think that's a very wise thing.
Okay. Dr. Nayak, how do you explain these election results? In 2008, the party which got only 12 seats manages 32 this time, and the one which had, which is this DPT, Druk Phunsom Shogpa, had 45 out of 47 seats, is reduced to 12.
Actually, I think it's a good, it's a perfect democracy in Bhutan, because one political party which won last time election and ruled for 5 years, now they are sitting in the opposition party. So that means the democracy in Bhutan is becoming more mature, because now the more mature people and more experienced people now in the opposition party with very strong presence in opposition seat. So they will and on the other hand, the ruling party, the PDP, People's Democratic Party. They are all some extent I can say in the administrative angle they are inexperienced, they are new. So there is opposition, the experienced people they can guide and they can help them in the formulating both national and democratic policies.
Surie, these results were not indicated by the first round. In Bhutan, only 2 parties can contest the final round, and there's an elimination round. In the elimination round, there was no indication that the PDP will make such gains, because in that round, while the DPT won 33 seats and PDP won only 12. Now from 12, they suddenly go up to 32. How did that happen?
But that's the advantage, you see, when you have direct runoff between 2 parties, votes don't get divided. And I think to come back to your last question very briefly, the previous ruling party had an advantage when the first elections took place. It's composed essentially of senior government officials who had very extensive experience in running the government. And I think the first time the people of Bhutan also probably felt that since we are now charting into new territory, let's give a seasoned set of hands an opportunity. Now they've seen what the seasoned hands can do. They also, I think, there's more confidence in the people themselves of how this system should run. So give the opposition a chance.
Mr. Shashank, do you think this controversy about India cutting fuel subsidies, India's unhappiness with the former Prime Minister Thinley, making overtures to China, was this a factor in the elections? What I'm really asking you quite bluntly is, do you think India frightened the Bhutanese into voting out DPT and voting in PDP?
What happens is that sometimes during elections, subsidiary issues become more important. India only tried to show as to how India and Bhutan's relations have evolved over the last 50, 60 years. And people should know that this relationship is it of advantage to Bhutan? Obviously, the electorate has said, yes, it is of advantage to Bhutan. Otherwise, they could have very well said, like the people in Nepal have been saying that, no, they would like to have equal type of relations with China and India. So they might have also gone in for something similar like Nepal. But they have identified that the relationship provides value to both India and Bhutan, and therefore this relationship should be continued. So I think what India did, maybe not intentionally, perhaps it was because the subsidies were being reduced within India, and they got reduced automatically to Bhutan also without actually prior discussions which should have taken place in a better organized relationship. But anyway, I think the impact has been there on the electorate, and the electorate has voted in favor of the opposition party, which wants special relations to continue with India.
Okay. We need to take a break at this point. We'll continue with this interesting discussion after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the process of democratization in Bhutan and what it means for India. Ambassador Surie, before the break we were discussing the impact of Indian decisions on Bhutanese elections. Now, was that a conscious decision? I mean, if Bhutanese think India is a friend, they would have voted in any case for India. Why did we have to din it into them that, look, if you are not friendly, this is what India can do? Or there's an alternative explanation, that this was really mismanagement on our part, that Indian Oil Corporation sent a letter saying subsidies have been cut, while the finance ministry was looking for alternative models because there was some discrepancy in the subsidy bills being submitted and the amount of fuel and LPG that was being supplied.
I think there are 3 issues here. I think the first issue, important issue, that the elections in Bhutan were not about India. The second issue is that I think there was a genuine mistake made when the subsidy decision to announce that we would no longer provide the subsidy was announced. I think it's reflected lack of coordination. Should not have happened. The timing was, I think, terrible, but it happened. But I'd like to put this in perspective. I understand from what I've read in the paper, the subsidy is about 50 crores.
Yeah.
The fact is we give several thousand crores to Bhutan. So I mean, if we had to cut money, why would we cut 50 crores?
Exactly.
We could have cut a much bigger amount. More importantly, when the outgoing Prime Minister visited India earlier this year, the government announced a huge amount of money for his government. So it's not that we had anything against A government or B government. I think this was simply an error that took place because of lack of coordination. I would not read more into that. Okay. Of course, on the other hand, Ambassador Shashank's perspective is perfectly valid. If it was a deliberate decision. But I personally believe it was not a deliberate decision.
But that's what government was saying. That the government of India is saying it's not a deliberate decision. It was a lot of mishaps happened.
Yes, also because if you look at it in perspective, look at the amount of subsidy as a proportion of how much we give Bhutan and how much we gave the outgoing Prime Minister in the current year. I mean, if we had to penalize him, why would we have given him so much money?
Okay. Mr. Shashank, how deep is Bhutanese democracy? Why is it that the voting percentage is very high in national elections, but when it comes to district and block level elections, the voting percentage falls?
I would say that Bhutan has a young population, and those young people have a lot of aspirations. They would all like to have visits to discos, they would like to have connectivity on internet, on everything. You know, they would like to be like any other youngster all over the world. And therefore they take interest in national elections. They feel that they can make a difference there by voting for one or the other party. And they also feel that training for governance, national governance, is extremely important. As far as the local bodies are concerned, I think still those feelings are there that the seniors know what is best. And therefore, whether one votes or not, the seniors will take into account the interests of the whole community. But I'm quite sure that gradually, as the national feelings also seep down to the local levels, and this idea is that they can really govern themselves in different styles, I'm sure that the percentage at the local levels would also go up, because definitely I have seen that there are very intelligent people in Bhutan, and Buddhism does not really mean that they are in any way only devoted to meditation and all that, but they use their brains extremely well.
Okay. Dr. Nayak, there's a debate in Bhutan about funding of political parties.
Sure.
How do political parties in a small country fund themselves? Now the party, the outgoing party, that is DPT, had said that the state must fund established parties. The People's Democratic Party says that this will favor the established political parties and new parties will never come up, so they were against state funding. But if the state doesn't fund these political parties in a small country, who will fund them? They will have to go for corporate funding, either from within or go for funding from neighboring countries. So how serious is this issue?
No, this was a major issue in the election campaign this time. For the first time it appeared. In 2000 it was not the case. And there is a lot of debate, either because there are allegations from PDP, the present ruling party, that there's a lot of money their parties are getting from the corporate houses, and they're getting support and sympathy from corporate houses.
Although there are not many corporate houses in
But
Bhutan.
how many the corporate houses are there are allegations from there. But if you'll see the constitutional arrangement in the constitution, and the state has to be fund all the political parties, and they are getting some amount of money for the campaigning. And still I think the election commissioners have control over that, and they are deciding all those issues and how much money they will give for the campaigning. And still it is, I think, almost accepted by all political parties that the state has to be given funds for the all political parties.
So let me ask a slightly different question. Does democracy in Bhutan extend to cultural and religious tolerance of people of Nepalese origin? And how do the people of Nepalese origin in Bhutan benefit from this democracy? I'm referring, of course, to what has happened in the past when democracy had not come in this form, but the process was on in 1990s. When people who had been brought in the late 19th century as agriculturists in southern Bhutan, who did a great job of making southern Bhutan the granary of Bhutan, those who were brought in 20th century as tax collectors by Bhutan House in Kalimpong. And then they were suddenly one day told to go away, and they became refugees, for no fault of theirs. So how does it benefit the ethnic minority in Bhutan?
I think you raised a very important issue. In fact, this is one of the principal problems which Bhutan faces, democracy or not, or without democracy. I think the move to get a lot of the Nepalese population to leave in the late 1980s, early 1990s was a conscious decision which was partly linked to the greater Gurkhaland movement in India. And I think that got the majority community in Bhutan very worried. Because as you remember, if you remember the late 1980s, early 1990s, there was a lot of pressure on the government of India also on this greater Gurkhaland issue. The issue is still in many ways alive. And there was a feeling in the ruling circles in Bhutan, I believe, that a lot of the Nepalese population is perhaps not as committed to Nepal as a citizen should be, to Bhutan, as a citizen should be. So a lot of Nepalese left, but a lot of Nepalese stayed. And as far as the current constitution, the current democracy in Bhutan is concerned, I think it does not discriminate between the Drukpa and the Nepalese.
Okay.
But it's an issue of citizenship. And I think there was certainly a belief in some circles at that time that perhaps the large elements of the Nepal population, Nepalese population in Bhutan are not committed citizens.
Okay, at that point we need to take a break. We'll be back with this interesting discussion after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing Bhutan's journey towards democracy and what it means for India. Master Shashank, let me come to you. How significant is China as a factor in India-Bhutan relations? Is China following a two-track strategy, one of trying to engage Bhutan on all international fora, and on the other hand, putting pressure on Bhutan by building infrastructure along the Chinese-Bhutan border and with Chinese People's Liberation Army crossing into Bhutanese territory occasionally, just as they do in India?
Well, China's policies, I think my friend Nalin would be able to say much better, but I find that they're very focused people. And they're led by, of course, the Communist Party on one side, but also engineers on the other side. So they are always going up for gargantuan, these big projects, railway projects, bridges, highways, and all that kind of thing. So they have been able to bring the railways up to Tibet, and they want to link up in Nepal. They are also interested in trying to convince other smaller countries, smaller neighbors, that friendship with China would mean very many benefits for them. And they would be more than generous to these countries. But overall, they would like all of them to be within the Chinese sphere of influence.
Yeah.
As regards India, becomes a different kind of an issue because they feel that India has also pretensions to be one of the leaders in Asia, if not in the world, along with China. And that India does not like this idea of G2, that is China and USA leading the whole world in the 21st century. Therefore, with India, they want to be very clear that each and every single inch of space should be earmarked, should be delimited, should be decided in negotiation between the two of them. So this creates difficulties in the relationship for Bhutan because they find sometimes very generous offers coming from China. They also find that many Bhutanese people are of similar stock, if not Tibetan, if not the Chinese. And therefore, they have some sympathy that why, if we can be so friendly with India, why not with a country like China? And then Chinese have this habit of trying to move closer to the SAARC nations. They asked for observer status. They were given the observer status, I think, at the Kathmandu summit, and then later on, at the Islamabad summit, they were asked at the SAARC summit that they would like to attend the SAARC meetings regularly. And so they are insisting that all SAARC countries must have a mission of all the observers of SAARC.
So what they're doing in Bhutan is part of that strategy?
Is part of that strategy to somehow show that they are the real leader in Asia and the world. And the countries in this region should understand that. And they have only good feelings for Bhutan. Now, Bhutan does know this. As far as I remember, the Bhutanese have made it very clear to India that they have clear positions on these issues, that unless India feels comfortable,
they won't do it.
They would not like to move ahead with China on any kind of temptations which might be offered by the Chinese.
Okay. A quick answer from you on this. There's a border issue between Bhutan and China, especially in northwestern Bhutan and central Bhutan. The northwestern sector impacts India because of Chumbi Valley, which is a tri-junction between Bhutan, China and India. Is it possible that the border settlement between Bhutan and China might have unintended strategic consequences for India?
Yes, I think the entire border dispute, somehow linked. India has some factor. There is a Chinese, if you see Chinese scholar, they often argue that Bhutan is not ready to basically swap certain territories from north to east to west or northwest. It's because of India is putting a lot of pressure on that because India has a better leverages and strong influence in Bhutan. So India advised them to not to actually swap all those territories. So this is the basically argument from the Chinese side. But if you see the China also try to use a pressure tactics by keep this border dispute alive because they just want to have their presence in this Thimphu. So they just and if you see the preconditions always that you have establish your diplomatic relations with us, then we'll resolve a border dispute.
Okay, I want to take that question to you, Ambassador Surie. It's true that we have a very special relationship with Bhutan. But if Bhutan is democratizing, opening up politically and economically, why should it not open diplomatically? Why should it not have diplomatic ties with China? How long will they have to look over their shoulder to see what is India going to say?
I don't think it's a question of having diplomatic ties. I think it's a question of whether you need a diplomatic representation in Thimphu or not. But again, this is a sovereign decision the Bhutanese will have to take at some point in time. every country has to take a decision on these issues. But to just remind you that if you look at the geography of that area, entire border between, let's say, India, Nepal, Bhutan and Tibet, the Himalayas are the big watershed. And the Nepal, Bhutan are all looking southwards. I mean, Bhutan, virtually all the rivers flow from north to south, not east to west. The ranges run from north to south. So I think, there is a certain geographical contiguity between India and Bhutan, for instance, which has its own implications for geostrategic and economic and other issues. Yes, it is true that the population of Bhutan is maybe of stock which is closer to Tibet, but then that is true also of our northeast. So I think there are objective reasons for Bhutan to have chosen the strategy that it has. It could have chosen differently. And partly these reasons also are based on the approach of China towards Bhutan and the historical approach of China towards Tibet. I think you cannot forget history. After all, China's claims are not limited to Tibet. I mean, they have had other views on what the other neighbors of Tibet were and how they should behave towards China. So I think there are elements which would favor both sides of the argument. But I believe that people in Thimphu, not just in the royal family, but most elements in the government had also understood, the senior elements had understood, and I think the younger elements have understood now, that there is more merit in retaining the southward limits and focusing on the southward limits.
Okay, last word to you. Last word to you, Ambassador Shashank. Will democratic change in Bhutan impact on the relationship with India, and in what way would India have to modify its behavior towards Bhutanese people?
Well, Bhutan would like to follow a democracy because they find that Indian democratic experiment has been very successful. On the other hand, they have this feeling that in Nepal, where also democracy was attempted and then ended up with communist parties fighting among themselves, the young people fighting against the senior leadership and all that. So they don't want to see that kind of instability coming into Bhutan. So therefore, India has a very special role to play to ensure that Bhutan remains a stable, peaceful neighbor for India. It is very friendly, so it should remain that way. And we want to promote relations among the South Asian countries, and Bhutan can really be the leader in that direction.
Okay. We've run out of time. I would like to thank all of you for sharing your views on Bhutan with our viewers. Thank you very much, and I hope you'll come again and we'll keep following the developments in Bhutan. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week with another interesting issue. Till then, goodbye.